Hi, this is photographer Lenny Foster of St. Augustine and Gallery 144, and I'm here on the Scott Grant Show, WSOS 103.9, St. Augustine Radio.
Hi, this is Scott Grant, and you're listening to the Scott Grant Show on 103.9 WSOS out of St. Augustine. And I'm here today with Lenny Foster. Lenny, I am thrilled to have you, man.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, you're really, really welcome, and I think our audience is just going to love you. Now, you are famous for your pictures. You're a photographer, and you're famous for your pictures of
I can
shoes.
dance, too.
Can you?
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of in-house dancing, though. Okay.
That's funny. That's funny. You know, as an aside, Jesse Owens, the famous sprinter from 1936 who defies Hitler at the Olympics, learned to dance from the guy they called Bojangles, and he actually traded one of his medals for dance lessons.
Oh, that's rich.
I know the guy's name I forget, but he was a pretty famous performer, and he's the sort of the inspiration of the song "Mr. Bojangles." But I can't remember his name right now.
Is it Bill Robinson?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. But then I didn't want to say that because Jackie Robinson and Bill Robinson just seemed too.
No, Jesse Owens.
Oh, Jesse Owens, right.
Yeah. It's easy to confuse the names. Yeah.
But yeah, he actually traded the medal he won in the 200 for dance lessons from Bill Bojangles Robinson. I don't know. I just sort of history sort of pops out every once in a while, and that was a moment. But you're famous for your pictures of shoes. And tell me about why the shoes. Where's the inspiration for the shoes?
Well, that's one of the many bodies of work. That's probably the most recent since I moved to St. Augustine 2.5 years ago. And I was initially inspired by the talk you did at the Lincolnville Museum. I think that was last year, where you did a slide presentation of the summer of '64, the wonderful documentary that you're working on. And that documentary should get support both from county, city, and state. So we're going to push for that.
Thank you.
There's stories that need to be told and history that needs to be revealed. I mean, there are a lot of people here that are aware of the story and want it told. And there's some on the other end of the spectrum that know the stories and would like to forget about them.
There are people who would, I think, rather see this story die. They don't, it's like the crazy uncle we keep hidden in the attic. And I think these are glorious stories that need to be celebrated.
Absolutely, they speak to the strength, conviction, courage, resilience of certain people, most of African American descent, but not exclusively. Yeah.
But going back now, you said you were inspired by that speech I gave at Lincolnville. That really warms my heart. I have to say, I mean, that's wonderful to hear.
I was so excited after that. I had recently rented an apartment on MLK Avenue in Lincolnville, really not knowing of the history of St. Augustine or Lincolnville, and attending your talk and seeing the slides and hearing the stories. I was just on fire after that. I had felt that there was more of a purpose for me being where I was at number 22 MLK. There was more to that historically to discover the history here than to be 3 blocks away from my gallery. I was excited about that initially, but when I heard the story, when I saw your presentation and visiting the Lincolnville Museum, which for everyone that's worth a drive to and to go in and see what they have.
It's a wonderful museum, and Floyd's great.
Preserving and sharing the rich history of St. Augustine. But I was very, very much inspired by that, and in the evenings I would get on my bike and ride around Lincolnville. One, not to be a couch potato after dinner, but secondly, to drive around and listen to the recordings for the Accord Freedom Trail stops. So in the evenings for me, it became like a history lesson where I would ride around and I would discover what took place, a block, 2, 3, 4 blocks away from where I was living. And with those stories, I started to get, because I knew nothing of the history here. So I was inspired to find out more and to reveal more and to share more, just like you do. So I got the idea of placing shoes in historical places to help tell a story, or using the shoes to represent historical people to help tell the story of the early African American history here, and also the civil rights movement.
That's fascinating. Hey, we've got to go to a break. Kevin's going to pick out some music for us, and we'll be back with Lenny Foster. Hi, this is Scott Grant. You're listening to the Scott Grant Show on WSOS 103.9 out of St. Augustine. And we're recording today in beautiful downtown Ponte Vedra Beach. My guest is Lenny Foster. And Lenny, before the break, we were talking about the shoes. And the shoes really, I think, moved me. And I think they must move other people as well, that image of the shoes. Why the shoes? You were talking about it a little bit, but why? Where did the inspiration for shoes come from?
You know, initially, it was probably visiting the structure kind of known as the slave market downtown the plaza in St. Augustine, and reading a little bit about the history there. And I actually I photographed a set of chains, slave chains, that my sister brought back from West Africa. And then I photographed them, and I thought, well, really what I need are feet. So there are a number of street people, let's say, they go back and forth in front of the gallery, and I stopped this one guy, and I asked him, I said, can I photograph your feet? And he kind of looked at me like, well, wait a minute, dude. This is not that kind of party. And I told him what I was up to, and he agreed. And so we went down, and I placed the chains, the shackles, on the pavers in front of his feet, and I photographed it, and it was a powerful image. I also paid my models too, so I gave him a crisp 20.
Oh, that's nice.
That was the beginning of the idea, and then I can't remember if I did that before I heard your talk and saw the Summer of '64 presentation. But once I saw the presentation, I knew that there was more to me coming to St. Augustine than to being close to my aged folks and to just photograph different things, you know, the beach and the flora and fauna. There was a higher purpose, unbeknownst to me, which is probably a good thing. So I started on this project, and also there's been much in the last couple, 3 years in the news about players kneeling during the national anthem and the reasoning beyond that. You know, there's, of course, you know, opposing camps as to, you know, supporting that or thinking it's totally disgracing or dishonoring the flag. But anytime people have stood up for civil rights, so equal rights, you know, there's been controversy and there's been struggle and there's been pain, and I wanted to do my part in saying what I believe my people have experienced and been through, not to just justify those actions by, you know, players kneeling, but to say, hey, this is part of our history. You want to know why we feel what we feel and why we are doing this? You know, part of it is as a result of our history. So my idea was to use the shoes, and you know, it was an education for me because I was ignorant of the history in St. Augustine and the civil rights history, and it's monumental.
Well, it is. It is. I mean, people talk about Montgomery, Selma, Birmingham, you know, Washington, D.C., and I always say, look, man, we should be talking about Montgomery, Selma, Birmingham, and St. Augustine, because the events in St. Augustine are as significant as anything else that occurs in the civil rights movement. And if you believe that the passage of the Civil Rights Act was a good idea, and I think most people do, but not everybody, which is sad in this day and age,
yes,
then the events in St. Augustine are huge. And when we come back, we got to go to break, but when we come back, we'll talk more about this.
Love to.
Hi, this is Scott Grant. You're listening to Scott Grant Show on 103.9 FM WSOS. I'm here with Lenny Foster, and before the break, we were talking about 1964 and how significant the events were in St. Augustine that summer. Just in case people listening on the radio don't know, I kind of want to go over some of them. Obviously, there were a lot of events leading up to it, but the events in June of 1964 lead directly to the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and one of those is that Andrew Young comes here, and and he leads a march. And during that march, he crosses over from Lincolnville into what they at that time called Slave Market Square, and he's badly beaten. And as I recall, you did a photo essay on that with the shoes. Is that correct?
That's true. It was one of the events that I discovered and wanted to create an image for, and I placed a pair of shoes turned on its side on the sidewalk there, and I had 5 other pair of shoes standing around that to kind of symbolize him being beaten down. And you know, I have read that Andrew Young came here at the request of Dr. King in order to kind of calm things down, because they were waiting. The Civil Rights Act was in Congress and waiting to be approved, and they didn't want anything to disrupt that. They didn't want any violent activities going on here to kind of take away the momentum for getting the act passed. So Andrew Young came down here, and it wasn't a plan, but he was invited. I don't know which local minister, but he was invited to join this march from, I don't know if it was from First Baptist Church or St. Paul's.
I think it was St. Paul's,
Church.
But I'm not 100% on that either. I'd have to look it up again, but I believe it's St. Paul's. And yeah, you're right. I mean, they were trying to calm things down, and what they didn't want was violence from the African American side. You know, that would taint in some ways. I think from their perspective, the efforts to pass the Civil Rights Act. And when Young gets here, they persuade him to march, and he leads the march. And I believe that what he does, what's significant, is he crosses that boundary on King Street, and he crosses over, and rather than circling the square, which is what they had normally done, he walks into Slave Market Square, and that creates the people who are there, the racists, the Klan. They don't like that. That's their territory. And I like to say that legalized segregation makes its final stand in Slave Market Square in St. Augustine. And so here comes Young into their territory, and they beat him pretty badly.
Yeah, almost beat him to death.
Well, they would have beat him to death, except that a white, either St. Augustine policeman or St. John's policeman saves his life. And you know they meet years later, but that guy saves his life. You can't say for sure that Andrew Young would have been killed, but the beatings would not have stopped had that one policeman not intervened.
Right. True.
So and then later, obviously, you have the events on June 11th. Martin Luther King is arrested here. And I don't know that I've seen any pictures of you doing that, but he's arrested at the Monson Motor Inn, which is owned by Jimmy Brock, who's a major player in all this. And he goes to jail for 3 days. And he spends 1 day in St. Augustine, and then he's sent to the Duval County Jail in Jacksonville. And in Jacksonville, he stays for another 2 days in solitary confinement. And then, of course, he's released. We're getting noticed. It's again time for a break. So we will come back and we will talk about the major day, which is a week later, with Lenny Foster on WSOS FM 103.9. Hi, this is Scott Grant. You're listening to the Scott Grant Show on 103.9 WSOS. I'm here with Lenny Foster, and it's been great so far having you, my friend.
I love it. We only have 4 hours to go. I'm excited about it.
Well, we're thinking about doing something else with Jorge, and maybe I will do a 4-hour interview with you one day. I think I could. Ooh. I mean, I think you and I could just sit here and chat for days.
Plenty of coffee, brother. Just bring plenty of coffee.
So we were talking about the civil rights movement, and we had talked about, June 9th, Andrew Young being beaten, and June 11th, Martin Luther King being arrested at the Monson. And that all leads into the events a week later. And on June 18th, you have these twin events that occur at the Monson Motor Lodge, where first the rabbis get arrested. And King has been in jail, and when he's in jail, he sends out a notice to his friend, Rabbi Dresner in New Jersey, and ask him to come help. And 16 rabbis and one lay person. At the time, it's reported as 17 rabbis, and I always want to say 17. But 16 rabbis and one lay person come down, and they pray in front of the Monson. And they're arrested for praying.
Beautiful.
And you're showing a picture. You're showing the picture that you did of that. Tell me about that picture, and tell me about your thoughts and the emotions you felt when you photographed those shoes.
Well, I have probably 24 images that I have completed and worked up, and 24 little blurbs about different events or people in this. I call it the Where We Stand project, and it being down at the Monson was powerful. And I've probably had 3 shoots there. One was photographing the 16 shoes representing the 16 rabbis, and first off, the Hilton has been more than hospitable and letting me come in and do what I need to do to get images. They allowed me to go up on the balcony and photograph the shoes down below on the pavers, on the bricks, and anytime I do a shoot, I try to feel the essence or feeling of what happened then and what I'm experiencing in the moment, and try to connecting those two so I can tell a good story by photograph. And so photographing this was powerful. And I also have another image of all of the shoes being, these are spread out and seeming as though they're all standing facing the head rabbi in prayer. I also have an image of all the shoes being kind of thrown together, to represent the moment that they were arrested. But it was powerful photographing that, and also photographing the swimming pool and placing shoes and an empty bottle, a jug around the swimming pool that represented the acid that Brock allegedly, or he did, pour into the swimming pool.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Let's stick with the rabbis for a second.
I've thanks to you, I have kind of researched the story a bit, and rabbis from all over the country came to help support Dr. King and to come for a peaceful, prayerful protest. And in most cases, the protest that kind of turns.
It's funny, not funny, ironic, I guess, but you saw me speak at the Lincolnville Museum to the kids. And one of the things that I remember from that event really stands out in my mind, even to today, is I tell those kids that the rabbis get arrested for praying. And do you remember the reaction to that? The sort of audible oohing and ahhing, like, what are you talking about?
How can that be?
Right.
Yes.
And those kids didn't know that. And I think that was a really powerful moment for me in my journey in telling these stories. Just their reaction to this idea that rabbis were arrested for praying.
And it was for me as well. And that inspired me. Being at the talk you had with the kids was powerful in many ways. But looking at these young people who probably most of them knew nothing of what the history of the 60s in St. Augustine, to discover, thanks to you, what went on here. Both they were in shock and awe, and two, in admiration of the people that had experienced what they did in the 60s. But that inspired me, too, to help tell a story in a way that was easier for people of any age or background, ethnicity to get, to understand, to access, because imagery can help do that. Also write little blurbs to go along with these images to give some sort of historical perspective and context. but I wanted to, as you say, like you have your calling with your Summer of '64 project. My calling is to also help tell these stories in a different way that's easy for people to access.
That's great. Hey, as usual, we're running late. We're going to go to a break. We'll come back. We'll talk more about the events at the Monson in June of 1964. Hey, this is Scott Grant. You're listening to the Scott Grant Show, and I'm here with Lenny Foster. And this has been a great interview so far. Before the break, we were talking about the Monson and the rabbis being arrested. And I don't know if you know this. I want to make sure that I mention it. Jimmy Brock had been deputized, I believe, the day before. And when those rabbis get arrested, it's Brock himself that does the arresting. Now, he doesn't haul them off to jail. He takes them to the squad cars and somebody else does. But Jimmy Brock, the owner of the hotel, is actually arresting those 16 rabbis that day. Did you know that? Were you aware?
I wasn't aware of that. That's news to me. But, thanks to your inspiration, the further I go along this, the more I discover, and I can actually only take in so much at a time before I have to go outside and get some air and celebrate.
Yeah, I hear you.
Celebrate the moment.
I hear you.
Yeah.
A lot of people were deputized that summer. So many were deputized that when Brian Simpson, who's a judge in Jacksonville and is sort of this area's Atticus Finch, he demands a list from Sheriff L.O. Davis of everybody he's deputized, and Davis is like, I don't know. There's too many. I don't know everybody. There were hundreds and hundreds of guys in St. Augustine were deputized to help keep the peace. So then that brings us, these guys get arrested, and as they're basically driving these guys off to jail, and they'll spend several nights in jail, the 7 kids jump into the pool. 5 African Americans, 2 whites, and the 2 whites were both males and were registered at the hotel. And I think the concept was that they were saying, these others are our guests. They jump in the pool. Brock runs around the pool pouring muriatic acid into the pool, which just it makes you shiver. It makes you shiver. Have you done pictures on that event as well?
Oh, most definitely. When I heard about it, I couldn't wait to get down to what is now the Hilton to create an image. And with this one image, I probably took my time just sitting by the pool, looking out over the wall to the bayfront, trying to imagine the events of that day and the terror of what the people in the pool experienced. They didn't know I'm sure to what degree what that acid was going to do to them, but that seemingly violent act of terrorism. I was shocked when I've seen that picture before, the historic picture before, but I wanted to create something to kind of memorialize that moment.
Well, it's a great picture. I just saw it. And that's an interesting place to stand, because while that pool is not the same pool, it's roughly in the same place and it's roughly the same shape. And so you kind of get a feel of what it would have been like when you stand there and you look out at the Bridge of Lions. We may start a horde of people heading over to the Hilton Bayfront to see this, but what it was like to be there that day. I felt the ghosts. I felt the ghosts when I was there.
Certainly, you certainly can. I think and whenever I go to a particular place and try to create an image, I try to feel that history, or whatever history there's there, and whatever energy is still there. I try to tap into that and create something, not just to say, "Oh, woe is us," but to say, "Hey, the factual. This is what has happened. This is where we are now." As a people, as a nation, as a culture or city, this is where we are now. But this happened. This happened here,
and it's a major event. And we kind of talked about this. Some people, it's like something we want to hide. But this is the event that the next day the Civil Rights Act passes. This is the event that changes the world, changes the United States, changes the world. Ends legalized segregation in this country because of that event. And as bad as Brock was, it's a significant event.
Oh, absolutely, because it's it garnered national attention. The front page of the Washington Post and on TV stations across the country. You can't when it's seen, you can't deny it.
Right, and it was all over. Oddly, not so much in the South, but it was all over the newspapers in the North and worldwide. And we got to take another break, but we'll come back and we'll talk about your projects for the Guggenheim. Hi, this is Scott Grant. I'm here with Lenny Foster on 103.9 FM WSOS, and we are broadcasting from beautiful downtown Ponte Vedra Beach. Lenny, this has been a great interview. It's gone by so fast, but I want to give you a chance to talk about your current projects. And you were telling us in the break that you are submitting some photographic art, to the Guggenheim.
Yes, just recently. In fact, yesterday I sent the 20 pieces that I've selected from this Where We Stand project, the shoe project. The deadline was yesterday, so I got that off. And every year they ask for submissions for the Simon Guggenheim Grant Foundation. So they give maybe 169 grants every year. I can't remember the number. 2,000 to 3,000 people apply every year. And I did last year and didn't get a grant, but I have done another year's worth in this project. And the shoe project, the Where We Stand project, ranges from, footprints at the slave market in St. Augustine to have an image of Ray Charles's practice piano at the Lincolnville Museum with a pair of shoes in front of that. I have a pair of shoes from the 1950s that represent football cleats that represent Willie Gallimore. I found out about his house, and I ordered a pair of.
Willie Gallimore. I saw that on your one of your posts you made, and I knew who Willie Gallimore was, and I knew he played at Florida A&M on that Rattlers football team a couple years ahead of Hayes, I'm a big Hayes fan.
Right.
But I didn't know Gallimore was from St. Augustine until I saw that. So you credited me with showing you some stuff. That's something I learned from you.
Yeah, that's the way it should work. I found out about Willie Gallimore because I was researching something else about the project. I saw an article, a story that Jessica Clark did for the news about the first school, New Augustine School for colored kids in West Augustine. So I went to Debbie Redding, the director of the St. Johns County Housing Homeless Coalition. They own the building. I went over there to photograph in that old school. Because it was historic, it opened in 1901, the first school for African Americans, and I think it closed in the 50s. But I discovered Willie Gallimore. I knew of the Willie Gallimore Center in Lincolnville, but I discovered that Willie Gallimore went to that school, and he also lived nearby. And I did a little research on him. He went to Florida A&M on a basketball scholarship, never touched a basketball. He played football. He was in the College Hall of Fame. He was drafted by the Bears in
1960 or
67. He was
was it that late? Okay, I thought he was old. I thought he was older than Hayes.
He was drafted by the Bears. They said he was faster running sideways than most men could run forward.
Yeah, that's right.
He was a quick dude. But I found out about him, and he also had a play in the civil rights movement. He came back here to be the first registered guest at a golf resort. It was just north of St. Augustine. I forget the name of it, but it was a golf resort, a country club. He was the first African-American guest that could register there. 2 weeks later, he went back to Chicago for the training camp, and he tragically died in an automobile accident. So, it's a great story. So, and part of the stories that I want to tell aren't all about the civil rights movement. There are a lot that are, but, I have Willie Gallimore. I have a picture that represents Ella Fitzgerald, because I heard she came through St. Augustine on the Chitlin Circuit to do a show there. I have a pair of I found out about the Cuban Giants from New York. They were part of the Negro Baseball League. Flagler had them come down in like 1885 to play summer ball as like entertainers. They were working in various hotels in New York, and the Cuban Giants, they weren't Cuban at all, of course.
Yes, I know. I'm aware. Yeah,
they could travel that way down south. They were kind of all-stars from different teams that made up this one team who was the best team in the Negro Baseball League. But they came down here for a summer to play. So I found out about that. So I created an image using these shoes from they're from the 40s, but these old baseball cleats. Took it out to the baseball field in Gallimore, near the Gallimore Center, and created an image to help tell that story. The putt-putt golf, I found out that was the first place that was integrated in St. Augustine.
Yeah, and I think that those places, the golf courses and that particular one as well, were integrated by a court order from Brian Simpson, who I'd mentioned earlier. We're running out of time. Tell everybody the address of your shop.
I'm at Gallery 144. It's 144 King Street, downtown St. Augustine.
All right. Hey, will you come back again, Lenny? Please.
I'd love to. I'll be back in about an hour. Thank you so much.
Thanks. We'll go hear some music, and we'll be back next week with another guest.